welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up a stack of source material that, honestly, tackles one of the oldest and most stubborn mysteries out there, telepathy.
Hmm.
For decades, the general scientific view has been, that any kind of extrasensory perception, ESP, is just pure fantasy.
Right. Wishful thinking, basically.
But the research we've dug into, well, it suggests some really rigorous minds in science are finding evidence that pretty much forces us to challenge that whole idea.
And that's really the core of our mission today, isn't it? We're unpacking the arguments, the data from researchers, often highly credentialed ones, who are claiming these phenomena are, well, absolutely real.
Despite all that skepticism.
Exactly. Decades of it rooted in what they call the materialist paradigm. The basic belief that consciousness is just generated by the brain, by the physical stuff.
Right. And if telepathy is real...
And that whole pyramid of understanding, it kind of has to fall apart, doesn't it?
And crucially, we're not just talking about, random internet theories here. The sources involve people like Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, Dr. Dean Radin, who's chief scientist at IONS, the Institute for Noetic Sciences.
Important names.
And the famous Cambridge biologist, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. I mean, their professional journeys, often from skepticism to acceptance, kind of demand we reconsider what's possible for the human mind, and maybe the animal mind, too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. A good place to start seems to be with, well, the ultimate skeptical conversion story, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake.
Right.
He himself admitted he originally thought telepathy was just rubbish and superstition. So what happened? What was the one story from a trusted source that just broke through that certainty?
Well, it was an account he heard, apparently in the Cambridge tea room, no less, from Sir Rudolph Peters. Now, Peters was a knighted biochemist, very respected.
It's not someone you'd easily dismiss.
Definitely not. And Peters told him about an investigation he'd done back in the 1950s. It involved a young boy, severely disabled, almost completely blind.
And this boy was doing something impossible, wasn't he? Reading an eye chart.
Yes, from across the room. But, and this is the key, only under one very specific condition.
Which was?
His mother had to be in the room, and she had to be looking at the chart, too. The second she looked away, or if she left the room, poof, the ability just vanished.
Wow.
So Sir Rudolph Peters, the biochemist, he concluded the only explanation was some kind of telepathic communication.
But they didn't just leave it as a story. They
Oh.
tested it properly.
They did. They formalized it because, you have to rule out subtle cues, unconscious signals, all that stuff.
So how'd they set that up to ensure it wasn't just, clever guessing or something physical?
Right. They needed distance. So they put
Right.
the mother in one lab by a phone and the boy in a completely separate lab about 5 miles away.
5 miles, okay.
Yeah. Then a third person would randomly pick cards, letters, numbers, show them to the mother, and the boy, miles away, had to say what she was seeing.
And the results.
The source material describes them as staggeringly higher than the chance level. For Sheldrake, hearing this from someone like Peters, with that level of rigor, it just made it impossible for him to keep dismissing it outright.
You can see how that would plant a seed of doubt. And that
Yeah.
seed clearly grew, didn't it? Sheldrake then focused a lot of his own research on the animal kingdom.
He did, yeah. Looking for telepathy between pets and owners, often where there are these really deep emotional bonds, like family members, really.
Makes sense. Pets seem like a good place to look, maybe less filtering than humans.
That's the idea. They might be more tuned in non-verbally. So Sheldrake's studies, for instance, showed something like 50% of dogs and maybe 30% of cats seem to anticipate their owner coming home.
Okay, but anticipation could just be routine, right?
Yeah.
Or hearing the car.
Exactly. That's the obvious objection. So they had to make it scientific. They randomized the return times. The owner would get pinged by a pager to come home at a random moment. And crucially, they ruled out familiar sounds. The owner would come back in a different taxi each time. No familiar engine noise.
Clever. So what was the key finding then? The thing that separated it from just habit?
The key was intent. It wasn't just when the owner got close. The animal often started anticipating, like going to the window, right when the owner decided to start heading home.
Really? When the thought occurred?
That's what the data suggested. Even if the owner was still miles away. And get this, if the owner's journey got interrupted, say, a flat tire, or their boss called them back to the office,
Yeah.
the dog would often just leave the window. Stop waiting. Almost like it picked up on the change in the owner's intention, their mental state.
Yeah.
That points to something beyond normal senses.
That's Yeah, that's hard to explain with just routine.
Right.
And that focus on the emotional connection, the depth of the bond, that brings us to the Nikki the parrot story.
Oh, Nikki the African Gray. Yeah, that's a fascinating case, owned by a woman named Amy.
This parrot had a huge vocabulary, right? Like 1,500 words, spoken sentences.
Apparently so. Even Jane Goodall was reportedly amazed by him. Amy noticed Nikki would sometimes comment on things Amy was just looking at, like pictures in a magazine across the room, or even seemed to react to her dreams.
Things Nikki couldn't possibly see or hear in a normal way.
Exactly. So that led to a really tightly controlled experiment, published in a peer-reviewed journal, too.
Okay, so what was the setup?
Amy was in one room, Nikki was on a totally different floor, about 55 feet away. A third person would randomly select images, sealed in envelopes, that corresponded to words Nikki knew. Amy would open an envelope and look at the picture.
And Nikki.
Nikki would often say the corresponding word, or even describe the picture. The results were reported as fantastically above chance. Odds against chance in the millions or billions to one range for some sessions.
Wow. But it wasn't just naming objects, was it? There was more nuance.
That's the really interesting part. It wasn't just like Amy looks at a flower, Nikki says flower, one example they give. Amy looked at quite a complex picture. A man standing by a yellow taxi, and the driver had his head sticking out the window. Nikki didn't just say taxi or man. Nikki said, careful if you're going to put your head out.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's like the parrot was getting the meaning, the context, the whole scene, not just a simple label. Telepathic interpretation, maybe?
That's incredible. And sticking with that theme of deep connection, especially in animals, there's that powerful elephant story. The one about Lawrence Anthony?
Ah, yes. That one.
Yeah.
It gets me every time. And it really bypasses any argument about human error or subtle cueing.
So Lawrence Anthony, he worked with elephants in South Africa.
Right. He gained the trust of this herd of, I think it was 9 initially, quite distressed elephants, and moved them to his game preserve, built a real bond with them.
Okay.
Then he died. And 2 days after his death, out of nowhere, a herd of 21 elephants, including the original ones, walked for 2 solid days, like 12 hours of travel.
Walked to where?
Straight to his house, his compound. They just stood there outside the house making these low, rumbling distress noises. Stood vigil for 2 days, then turned around and walked back.
And no one had called them. No one told him he died.
No one. They just knew. And maybe the most stunning detail, the source mentions that for years afterward, maybe 3 or 4 years, the entire herd would return to his compound every single March 4th.
The anniversary of his death.
The anniversary. Every year. That depth of connection, it seems to unlock something, doesn't it? Some kind of non-local communication tied to emotion.
Yeah, it really speaks volumes, whether it's mother and child, owner and pet, or even elephants and someone they trusted deeply. It really suggests telepathy, if it exists, is strongest where there's love or need or value.
Exactly. That seems to be a recurring theme.
Okay, so the animal evidence pushed forward by people like Sheldrake seems pretty compelling. Where does that leave the human research? What's considered the gold standard there?
For that, we really need to look at the work of Dr. Dean Radin. He's the chief scientist at IONS, the Institute for Noetic Sciences.
Right, IONS. That was founded by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, wasn't it? After his experience in space.
That's right. Mitchell had this profound overview effect, looking back at Earth, this feeling of deep unity and interconnectedness. It basically spurred him to want to study consciousness scientifically.
Makes sense. So Radin's work at IONS, what's the key experiment?
Radin and many others point to what's probably the most replicated experiment in this field over the last, say, 50 years, the Ganzfeld telepathy method.
The Ganzfeld. Okay, let's break that down for the listener. How does it work? It involves a sender and a receiver kept separate.
Yes, separation is key. But the receiver isn't just sitting there, they're put into a state of mild sensory deprivation.
How do they do that?
Usually it involves reclining in a comfortable chair, maybe in a darkened or softly lit room, wearing headphones, playing white noise, and often halved ping-pong balls over the eyes under a red light to create a uniform visual field. It induces this kind of dreamy, hypnagogic state. The idea is to reduce the normal sensory input, quiet the mental noise.
Lower the filters, basically.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the sender is far away, in another room or even another building. They're shown a randomly selected target, usually a photograph or a short video clip, and they just concentrate on it, trying to mentally send that image to the receiver.
Okay. And the receiver describes what comes into their mind.
Right. They talk aloud about any images, feelings, thoughts that pop up. Afterwards, they're typically shown 4 options, the actual target plus 3 decoys, and asked to pick the one that best matches their experience during the session.
What are the results like after thousands of these sessions worldwide?
Well, over close to 4,000 documented sessions across many different labs, the overall hit rate, the receiver picking the correct target, consistently comes in around 30 to 31%.
Okay, 30%. How does that compare to chance with 4 options?
Chance would be 25%, right? 1 in 4. Getting 30 or 31% consistently over thousands of trials. Statistically, that's just astronomical. The source material literally uses the phrase, a gazillion to 1 odds against chance. And researchers take huge pains to prevent any cheating or sensory leakage, double-blinding, automated randomization, soundproofing. Rating claims the Gansfeld test is about as close to a loophole-free experiment as we know how to make.
That consistency from dozens of labs over decades? That does sound like a gold standard.
It's the replication and the statistics that make it so hard for skeptics to just wave away.
Which, naturally, brings us to the massive question. How? If the evidence is solid, how does this actually work? It doesn't seem to function like, radio waves or energy we understand.
Right. That was the first thing scientists tested. Could it be some kind of subtle electromagnetic effect, like cell phones or radio signals?
Makes sense to check that first.
So they designed some pretty extreme experiments. They put the receiver inside heavily shielded chambers. We're talking Faraday cages, sometimes double-walled steel containers weighing like 2,000 pounds.
Stuff designed to block electromagnetic waves.
Totally block them. They even ran experiments with the receiver inside a submarine deep underwater where EM waves simply can't penetrate.
And did the shielding work? Did it block the telepathy?
Nope. Messages still got through. Distance didn't seem to matter, and physical barriers, even extreme shielding, had basically 0 effect on the success rate.
Okay, that rules out classical physics then. Radio waves get weaker with distance, they get blocked by shields.
Exactly. So whatever's going on here, it seems to be, as the source puts it, much more radical than any known fields or forces in classical physics.
So if distance is irrelevant, if shielding doesn't stop it, where did science turn next? What explanation doesn't violate those findings?
Well, the only real candidate left standing that fits the non-local aspect is quantum physics.
Yeah, entanglement.
Precisely, the whole weird concept of non-local connections. Quantum entanglement suggests that 2 particles, once linked, can remain connected in some way, so that measuring one instantly influences the other, no matter how far apart they are.
Across the room or across the universe, the effect is instantaneous.
Right. Faster than light. It breaks our classical intuition about space and time.
So here's where it gets really wild for us, for people. If tiny particles can become entangled and share information instantly, the next logical leap is, well, can humans become entangled? Especially people with strong emotional bonds.
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? If entanglement is the mechanism or something like it, then it completely undermines the whole materialist paradigm.
Explain that paradigm again quickly.
Sure. The materialist view basically says consciousness is produced by the brain. It's an emergent property of complex matter. So consciousness sits right at the tippy top of the scientific pyramid built on biology, which rests on chemistry, which rests on physics down at the bottom.
Okay.
But that model has famously failed to solve what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
Which is?
How does 3 pounds of wet gray tissue, the brain, actually create the subjective feeling of being? The redness of red, the feeling of sadness, the internal movie. Materialism can describe the correlates of consciousness in the brain, but not how the experience itself arises from matter.
So the alternative model, the one suggested by telepathy research and quantum ideas, does what? Flips the pyramid.
Exactly, it flips it right over. In this view, consciousness isn't the product at the top, it's the fundamental element, it's the base of the pyramid. Everything else, physics, matter, energy, arises out of or within consciousness.
Whoa. Okay, so consciousness is the ground floor of reality.
That's the idea, and if that's true, if consciousness is the fundamental fabric, then it's maybe not so surprising that individual minds, which are like eddies in that larger ocean of awareness, can occasionally overlap or connect.
Because they're ultimately part of the same thing.
Right. Our awareness isn't necessarily trapped inside our skulls. The brain might be more like a receiver or a transceiver, tuning into a broader field of consciousness.
Okay, that reframes the question then. If consciousness is fundamental and we're all connected, the question becomes less, how is telepathy possible? And more,
Why aren't we telepathic all the time?
Right. Why isn't it just constant noise? Dr. Powell had a good analogy for this, didn't she? The brain is a smartphone.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. If consciousness is like the external cloud, the internet of awareness.
Then the brain is the device accessing it.
Exactly. But here's the really crucial hypothesis that follows from that. Maybe the brain evolved not to amplify psychic information, but actually to filter it out, to reject most of it.
Why would it do that?
For survival. Imagine trying to navigate the physical world if you were constantly flooded with everyone else's thoughts and feelings or information from distant places or times. You'd be overwhelmed. You need a boundary.
A filter, a shield.
They call it a dissociative boundary. This feeling of being separate, of being me inside this body, might be a crucial evolutionary adaptation to help us focus on immediate physical survival needs.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it perfectly explains the Ganzfeld results.
Right. Why does sensory deprivation increase success? Because you're deliberately lowering the brain's filtering mechanism. You're turning down the shield, quieting the noise of the physical world.
Allowing that deeper connection to come through more clearly.
Exactly. When the brain is less busy processing external stuff, those subtle signals from the wider consciousness field might have a better chance of getting noticed.
Okay, so we have compelling anecdotes, rigorous animal studies, replicated human experiments like Ganzfeld, and even a plausible, if radical, explanation tied to quantum physics and fundamental consciousness. Yet there's still massive resistance, isn't there? Mainstream science, academia, journals, they mostly still seem to cling to the old materialist view.
Oh, absolutely. There's huge institutional inertia. And sometimes it goes beyond just skepticism into what some critics call scientism.
Scientism meaning?
Kind of like the ideological belief that the current materialist framework of science is the only way to understand reality, and anything that doesn't fit must be wrong, ignored, or even actively suppressed. Data be damned, almost.
And we see examples of that suppression in the source material.
Yeah.
People being actively discredited.
We do. Dr. Powell, for instance, faced serious professional consequences, briefly losing her medical license, apparently just for discussing ESP, even though it was later reinstated.
And Sheldrake's TED Talk.
Yeah, his talk, The Science Delusion, which questions some core dogmas of materialism, was famously one of the very few TED Talks ever to be taken down from their main platform and sort of relegated to a corner with a warning label. That feels less like scientific debate and more like, well, institutional gatekeeping.
Protecting the old paradigm.
Pretty much. Calling researchers pseudoscientists, blocking funding, refusing publication. It happens.
But it feels like the tide might be turning, however slowly. You mentioned the Manifesto for Post-Materialist Science.
Yes, back in 2014. Hundreds of scientists from various fields signed on, basically declaring that materialism as a complete explanation for reality is, well, dead, or at least insufficient.
And this includes scientists who started out as total materialists.
Definitely. Like Dr. Marjorie Woollacott, who's now president of the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences. She was a neuroscientist, a staunch materialist, but after looking deeply into the evidence, not just psi phenomena, but things like near-death experiences too, she concluded that consciousness has to be more fundamental.
So the synthesis, the big picture emerging from all this, is that maybe all these different psi phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, aren't separate weird abilities.
That's the implication. They might all just be different ways that our individual consciousness interacts with or accesses information from this underlying fabric of consciousness. Call it the quantum field, the collective unconscious, the mind of God, different names for potentially the same fundamental reality.
Okay, let's bring this back to you, the listener, for a final thought. Thinking about that idea, the brain's shield, the dissociative boundary that filters out this wider awareness. This source material touches on some fascinating implications for neurodiverse people.
Right. If the typical brain evolved this strong filter for survival, what about brains that are wired differently? The source suggests, speculatively of course, that some neurodivergent individuals might inherently have a thinner shield, or maybe just a different kind of filter.
Meaning they might be naturally more tapped in?
Potentially.
Yeah.
More sensitive or open to that broader sea of awareness, and perhaps more prone to experiencing psi phenomena because their default filtering system operates differently than what we consider neurotypical. It's an intriguing idea.
It really is.
Yeah.
So here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with today. If the very foundation of reality is consciousness, and our brains evolved this incredibly powerful shield mainly for physical survival, What amazing human potentials might we be currently blocking out collectively in the name of sticking to that old scientific paradigm? What could happen if we learn how to consciously, maybe even safely, lower that shield just a little? What might we discover?
Something profound, perhaps.
Definitely something to ponder.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.